Hello and welcome to the programme. Without water, we cannot live. So when you think that a neighbour is leaving you quite literally high and dry, tensions are bound to rise. When that dispute involves almost 250 million people, how do you prevent conflict? This is Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, sometimes known as GERD, is already siphoning off some waters from the Blue Nile, despite no agreement between two downstream countries, Egypt and Sudan, over how to stop their supplies drying up. For almost a decade, the three countries have argued over how to get their fair share of the life-giving Nile waters. Ethiopia's dam is on the Blue Nile, which flows on through Sudan, where it meets the White Nile, becomes the Nile River, and continues into Egypt. Ethiopia says it needs the power the dam will give to help many of its 110 million people out of poverty, to provide them with electricity. Sudan and Egypt say it will do the exact opposite to their populations, depriving them of vital water and making them poorer. But no resolution is in sight. The US is withdrawing some aid to Ethiopia, which itself has just banned flights over the dam, it says, for security reasons. Authorities in Ethiopia say it's close to starting a second filling of the reservoir. Pope Francis has wondered if we are not moving towards a great world war over water. So the question here is how to prevent tensions escalating and avoid any kind of conflict. Well, I'm very pleased to say we can go to Addis Ababa, capital of Ethiopia, say hello to William Davidson, senior analyst for Ethiopia at the International Crisis Group, to Atlanta, USA, and we welcome Yohannes Gedamu, lecturer of political science at the Georgia Gwinnett College, also a political commentator on issues about the Horn of Africa and Ethiopia in particular. Born in Ethiopia, left the country in 2007. And we say hello to Adel Darwish in London, journalist and author of Water Wars, Coming Conflicts in the Middle East. Great to have all three of you with us. In the summer of this year, Adel, Ethiopia began the first stage of filling the dam. It is a long process, but the first stage began. As far as you are aware, has Egypt suffered at all in terms of a lack of water?
No, they haven't. I mean, despite the noise they are making, it is more of political noise rather than real hardship. And the also this year have just seen a lot of flooding and rains, most unusual, I think, going back to 1913, 1923, where they had sort of record flooding there. So they have more water than the usual stuff. I think it's the more of the political issues rather, especially when the time it takes to fill the dam, because it actually shorter years rather than actually making longer years. I mean, ideally, it'd be like 15 to 20 years, and that would not affect the flow of the water, the speed of the water at Aswan, where they have the big dam.
The reason I bring this up, because there's a chap called Abbas al-Shakawi, who's head of natural resources at the Africa Research Institute, and I'll bring you in, Yohannes, if I may, at this point. He said there is no problem at all with water levels in Egypt. The Aswan High Dam contains enough water reserves to withstand years of drought. The question is, what is Egypt making all this fuss about?
Thank you for this question. I think it is down to not facts or any logical analysis of what is actually going on, but rather I think Egypt has been, just like Adel said, has been making a lot out of the situation, possibly because of politics and so possibly because of nationalism. I think the Egyptian administration under President al-Sisi is under huge pressure for many different reasons. So to show some sort of defense when it comes to the issue of Nile waters, which means, of course, so much for Egypt, will help gain him something politically. I think that's what the fuse is all about. But the water levels have been unprecedented in unprecedented ways, very much high. The forecast looks like really great, both for the future flow of water towards the downstream countries, but also when it comes to the filling of GERD itself.
William, I just wanted to ask you, as somebody who's in Addis Ababa and who knows Ethiopia pretty well, what do you think this would mean to the population if it were to get the electricity it needed from this dam?
Well, this is a very large project. It's one of Ethiopia's biggest ever infrastructure investments. The Nile also holds a huge amount of importance for people for political and historical reasons. Ethiopia believes that they've been denied their rights to use the Nile River. So it's really a very important project. It has the potential to transform Ethiopia's economy by generating a huge amount of electricity for the domestic grid as well as for exports. So it's relatively it's a very popular project and actually one of the few things that brings Ethiopians together at the moment.
I want to go back to Adel on the question of political posturing, which was one of the suggestions that you made as to why Cairo is being very vehement in its opposition to this dam. If it is just for domestic consumption, why is it making such a fuss about the fact that water levels will go down? Is it not generally believed that they will?
Well, first of all, the Egypt worries about the Nile or any project on the upstream predates Sisi, predates Morsi, predates Mubarak, predates even Colonel Nasser himself. So that's going back to Churchill sort of designing the Nile Basin Treaty back in 1929. So that's actually predates all of that. So it's total nonsense to talk about that, the Sisi under pressure and all of this rubbish. The actual reason is not setting a precedent that a country in the upper stream can actually do whatever they like without negotiation with the other country downstream and with the countries who have got something in international law called the customary use. So setting the precedent is that what it was. That's number one. Number two, as it happened, yes, they have a lot of storage behind the Aswan Dam, and as I said, this year is a lot of flood. What would happen if we go back to like a 1970s year when actually drops down to what it has actually been? So this is the two precedent they don't want to actually to set, and because international law is inadequate, and the only precedents where the World Bank set a precedent between Pakistan and India back in 1949 and between Syria and Turkey in 1953, that all the countries who have the customary use of the water should be involved in the decision and in how long it takes the dam. That's actually the crux of the matter, rather than any internal political pressure.
Okay, I want to ask you in a little while, Adel, about something you wrote 17 years ago, but I'll go to William and to Yohannes on this one. Ethiopia has banned flights over the dam. There are serious concerns, it is reported, about possibility of some kind of conflict. Is that, in your opinion, Yohannes, you first, is that at all likely?
I think it is highly unlikely. Regardless of the level of nationalism, whenever the Egyptian officials talk about this issue, I mean, how in nationalist terms, even in Ethiopia or in Sudan, they totally understand how damaging war is, how unnecessary conflict is. The only solution to address this issue is through negotiations, but also when it comes to Ethiopia, I think in any way, whenever you think about international relations, what is considered as one inevitable, feature of international relations, and you always prepare for the worst. So it's not going to be in any way surprising for Ethiopia to ban flights over the skies of GERD, over GERD. But it will also be, I think, not only to do it, but even to think about it rhetorically, it is going to be bad for Egyptians, because when you think of tolerating a country that actually provides over 85% of the waters that you need or that you receive, and it makes the future extremely complicated. So
indeed, can I just move it on just a little bit, William? I'd like to come to you in a short while to talk about the United Nations Security Council and some of the things that have been said there. But Adel, I wanted to go back to that article you wrote in 2003, and you talked about the fact that the Egyptian president Anwar Sadat said at that time, this is 1979, that his nation will never go to war again except to protect its water resources. Is this one of those exceptions?
It would be one of those exceptions if, for example, someone threatens direct threat to the Nile. If, for example, say a terrorist group based in a country unfriendly to Egypt, like in Sudan on the south of Eritrea, around those countries, and then under Article 51, then they would actually intervene there to sort out this group if they threaten the Nile. I mean, this is an extreme circumstance. It's a protection, it's a defensive. In fact, he gave me the idea of writing the book after I interviewed him during the peace process with Israel. But going back to the whole question of war, this solution is not going to be solved by war. War is means to an end. And if two countries are actually fighting over border like the Prussian-French war, or Alsace and Lorraine, and over that, unless country A totally defeats and occupies country B, then you cannot really solve that issue, or at least make it to part of the country. So it's again, these solutions can really be an extreme when there's a direct threat for a tactical reason. But I agree with everyone else who would say that should be through cooperation, through sharing projects, through perhaps building the Cecil Rhodes' dream of a big railway for Africa, which can be generated by electricity from the Ethiopian dam and from the Egyptian Aswan dam. This is the kind of thing that solves the problem, not war.
William, let me come to you. You've been silent for a little while. I want to give you some ideas of what was said at the UN Security, or virtual UN Security Council meeting a few months ago. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sami Shukri. The matter on which I'm addressing you today is of the greatest consequence to the Egyptian people and requires, like our efforts to combat this global pandemic, a commitment to uphold the spirit of cooperation and to recognize that no nation is an island unto itself. So he's talking about negotiations about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, to which the Ethiopian ambassador, Tai Atski Selassie Amdi, counters, "Let me be clear, Ethiopia does not believe the issue being discussed today has a legitimate place in the Security Council. It's bound to set a bad precedent and open Pandora's box. This council should not be a forum for exerting diplomatic pressure." With the fact that the United States, William, has withdrawn an element of aid to Ethiopia, is there a sense in that country that it is being isolated and that this will perhaps go to the United Nations Security Council, which it would not like?
Well, there's certainly a sense, and there has been for a very long time in Ethiopia, that when the international community tends to get involved with these issues, they tend to side with Egypt. That's the Ethiopian perception. And in 2020, that has been particularly prominent. We had a period of negotiations earlier this year when the United States got involved. Actually, Ethiopia ended up walking out of those negotiations because they felt that the US had clearly taken Egypt's side. So there is no doubt that there is that perception in Ethiopia, but it isn't necessarily going to have a material effect on the construction of the dam or on the negotiations surrounding it. Ethiopia's position is that this is their sovereign right to develop their own water resources, but because it's a transboundary river, they have to ensure that it causes no significant harm downstream. Now, that is Ethiopia's position, and they are saying that, for example, with the dam filling schedule that they have suggested, to do it over 5 years or possibly 7 years if there is below average rainfall during those years, they say that that will not cause significant harm downstream because there is enough water, or one of the reasons being that there is enough water stored in the High Aswan Dam to compensate for any reduction due to the filling of GERD. It's clear that this is a very important existential issue for Egypt, and they have talked about it as a national security interest, hence Ethiopia's moves to defend the dam. And this is why it's ended up at the UN Security Council. But it is not clear how that process will resolve the essential dispute. And it certainly is not clear how that will influence Ethiopia or change Ethiopia from its negotiating position, which has been consistent ever since the inception of the project in 2011.
So let me ask you, Yohannes, as somebody who left the country 13 years ago, there's been big change since then. How difficult is life for the millions and millions of rural Ethiopians that the president says he wants to take out of poverty and help with this dam project?
It's a very good question, David, but I would also love to add just one point to what Will was saying. The Egyptian government took the issue to the Security Council right after Ethiopia kind of diplomatically or politely, if I may say, asked the United States government and World Bank to either postpone it or to delay the discussions because they have got some consultation to do at home. But then, between that time and until the African Union stepped up its efforts and asked to negotiate, to lead the negotiations, the Egyptian government took the issue to the Security Council. I think that was such a good move for the Egyptians because Ethiopia, just like Will said, is within its sovereign rights to build this dam, but at the same time, from the get-go, the country was just happy to share, any information that it has when it comes to life at home for Ethiopians. Just to give you my own personal experience, I was born and bred in northern part of Ethiopia, and I think it was when I was 12 or 13 years old when, for the first time, a small town that I used to live in received a 24-hour electric grid. It just became and that was like a huge joy for that small town and for residents there. And even then, every few days or every day, power interruptions are extremely common. About 40-some% of Ethiopians, 46 or 47% of Ethiopians have access to electricity. And even those with access to electricity face huge interruptions. And if you stay just 1 week in Addis Ababa, the capital city, that's just enough to basically understand, what the people go through every single day. But think about industrialization and the manufacturing sector in general. Ethiopia, a country with estimated 120 million people, needs industrialization, needs urbanization, manufacturing sector to develop. But if you do not have any electric power to support these sectors, that plan, just talking about industrialization and improving in manufacturing sector will not get you anywhere. So the GERD, when completed and operational, will definitely change the lives of Ethiopians.
Undoubtedly, it will, and that's why Ethiopia sees it as so vital. Adel, there have been so many talks since 2011, perhaps even earlier, when this idea was just an idea. They have got nowhere. at the moment. So I want to look at an alternative. Your suggestion of a water dollar, an exchange between these countries on the Blue Nile.
Each cubic kilometer of water equal water dollar. And it's not only the water that is actually flowing from one part to the other. It's also if you are importing and exporting crops, rice or other grains, how much water is actually being consumed in growing these crops. So you calculate it. The electricity is being generated and so on. So the Egypt, Ethiopia, South Sudan, North Sudan, Eritrea, and on the other side, the Uganda and Tanzania and so on, and Kenya can reach some kind of an agreement. So country like Egypt use a lot of water and also more advanced economically. They can send back either in money or in this case in electricity to the other countries the equivalent of the water dollar. So Ethiopia would be almost like
they pay for it. They pay for it in kind.
Well, say Ethiopia is depositing these water dollars in a building society, in a bank, and then getting return interest. And the Egyptians would be borrowing a bit, so they're paying this interest. And that's how they avoid the conflict. Because let's forget, if the Ethiopians want to avoid going to the Security Council, then they should stop saying, oh, this is our sovereign right and so on. It's not quite the same, because when you have water is actually going between 110 to 152 cubic meter per second in Ethiopia, then it actually loses. If you fill the dam in 7 years instead of 15 years, then you have probably half of that flowing to Aswan.
Okay.
In Aswan, they cannot get electricity. And that
I need to bring in William again at this point.
Security Council.
Adel, I do need to bring in William to talk about the regional issues in this. President Sisi, Egyptian president, stopped off in Nairobi the other day, had talks with President Kenyatta of that country, of Kenya, and they reaffirmed that they would stand together on issues such as this. Is there any sense that there's a fracturing of support for Ethiopia?
That's certainly something that the Egyptian government, an impression they would like to give. I think, for decades, there's been all sorts of diplomatic maneuvering around this issue. Really at the crux of the Nile debate is an effort by certain of the Nile riparian countries to get a new treaty into force, a multilateral treaty which equitably shares the Nile waters. It could govern the type of joint investment projects and all sorts of cooperative mechanisms. And ultimately that would make totally obsolete these colonial era treaties and successive bilateral treaties between Sudan and Egypt, which hand the Nile waters in theory to those two countries alone. As a result of those efforts to introduce a new legal regime, the Egyptian government at times has been engaged in this sort of diplomatic lobbying. And that it sounds like exactly what was going on in Nairobi. Okay. And this really does relate to the Renaissance Dam issue. Because at the crux of the negotiations on the Renaissance Dam is a sort of demand for a minimum flow of water downstream coming out of the Renaissance Dam. Ethiopia's position is that they are willing to enter into those sorts of negotiations about ensuring a guaranteed minimum flow, but they have to be part of broader water sharing discussions. They cannot be part
and I just want to ask you very quickly, because we are running
project.
right out of time. William, you're part of the International Crisis Group. In terms of a crisis, can a real dangerous threat of conflict be avoided?
Yes, absolutely. And indeed, we saw a potential crisis point this summer where Ethiopia started filling the dam without an agreement in place, and that was opposed by Sudan and Egypt, and indeed the US weighed in on that. That moment has passed. The dam is now filled with 4.9 billion cubic meters of water. That would make bombing the dam an insane thing to do because of the damage downstream. So really, the only solution here is some form of cooperation. And yes, that needs Ethiopia to act in a responsible way, as it says it's going to do. But it also needs Sudan, and most importantly, Egypt, to accept that the Renaissance Dam is a fact on the ground, and to secure their interests in terms of water supplies, they need to cooperate with Ethiopia. And actually,
cooperation is the key.
can mean that the Renaissance Dam brings all sorts of benefits to the entire region.
Thank you all very much indeed. Sometimes I feel like I'm being extremely rude, cutting you off, but time is my enemy. You are my friends. Thank you very much for coming on the program. Much appreciated. And wherever you happen to be watching this program, that is also very much appreciated. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, we hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.